We had been with the silver-furred curator for close to a month, surveying the tribes of a scaly bipedal species which were at about the level of development of our own Australopithecine ancestors. She told us that they had mastered the use of rock hammers and bone clubs without curator help. They were using fire in increasingly necessary ways for their evolving lifestyle, but they had not learned to make fire from scratch yet, and that might be grounds for an intervention. They numbered about 30,000 in 80 or so tribes living in a region of about 50,000 square kilometers of mixed forest and grassland. They had followed the common pattern of moving from an arboreal life, which had given them good vision and spatial awareness, to walking on the ground. In their new ground-bound existence, they increasingly needed fire to ward off threats at night and to cook their food, which was increasingly protein-based. They had learned to tend fires carefully, but all the tribes were subject to the occasional loss of their seed fire, and then they had to wait for a fortunate lightning strike or an encounter with another tribe to make a new one. Such fireless periods were increasingly dangerous for them, and it had happened on a few occasions that all the tribes lost their fire at the same time due to a widespread weather catastrophe, and those incidents now threatened them with extinction. We watched them at night since that was when their fire-tending habits were most on display. Our camp was on the far side of the world so we could rest when we weren't observing them. The curator had simply given us the coordinates and told us to show up with portable shelter, on an interstellar jump that limited us to a few kilograms of gear. We asked if there would be trees, and she said of course there would be trees, so we brought a covered hammock. She watched curiously as we set it up. Her own shelter was a tent of impossibly thin and strong fabric, which inflated itself and stiffened to hardness, and maintained its shape despite having openings. It was well beyond human technology. "Considering your technology, your approach to the problem is elegant," she said of the hammock. "Fortunately, our implants made it unnecessary to pack in food, water, or fire for our expedition. But almost all the curator's children had circadian rhythms which enforced a daily period of rest most easily observed in darkness. The curator was evaluating which tribe would be the optimal recipient of a Prometheus stone. Parameters included how likely they would be to need it and how often, incentivizing them to learn its lessons, and how likely they would be to meet other tribes and pass their new skill along once the stone had done its work. We understood that this was a complex problem the curators had evaluated millions of times, and listened attentively as she explained each step of the reasoning both in our investigation and her final decision. We observed from the distance, cloaked by our invisibility shields and the night. Our implants made it possible to listen as if we were present in each tribe's camp, and we had a good understanding of their primitive language and its already spreading variations. Each tribe had a favored territory which overlapped those of other tribes, and migration routes which both intersected each other and varied over time in ways the curator had been studying for some time. Finally, she announced her decision. "This is one of the larger tribes and is likely to split within a generation or two. It has a large territory with high fan-out for encounters with the other tribes, and a storm system is moving in which is quite likely to douse their fire in a few days." She reached into the fabric pouch she used to carry field equipment and produced what looked like a piece of petrified wood. She handed it to Emma. It had a small depression in one side, and when Emma passed her hand over it, a small flame appeared. "This doesn't look like the one we saw at the Civilian Museum," Emma said. "We have different versions. This one relies less on symbol reading since these creatures aren't making symbolic markings yet. At first it will simply give them fire, but over time it will require more and more of the practical skill of making and operating a fire drill in order to work. Eventually their skill will be perfect and it will stop working, forcing them to try their technique on real wood. What if they don't notice it? Once it's placed in initiation mode, it will glow continuously until it is picked up and activated. They don't seem likely to move from where they are before the storm system arrives, so they will probably need it while they are still here where it can attract their attention. In some situations, we might help them by extinguishing their regular fire ourselves, but I don't think that will be necessary here." The curator let Emma carry the stone to them. The invisibility cloak wasn't perfect, but early in the morning when the fire was burning low and most of the creatures were fast asleep, she easily snuck in and tucked it into the embers of their fading fire. When Emma got back, the curator and I were examining telemetry readings from the stone. "You placed it well," the curator said. "There's an excellent chance they will activate it simply by renewing the fire as it is. That will let them know what it can do when they truly need it. 1,000,000 years from now, this may turn out to be the most important event in this race's history, or it may come to nothing. We can never be sure. It's a bit overwhelming to think of what I just did that way. You are curators now. What you just did is the very essence of curation." We continued to watch the tribe for a few more evenings, and as expected, the rains came and doused the fire. They had noticed the stone and put it aside, as wary of it as they were curious. But when the fire died, there was a great flutter of argument among them before one of them deliberately made it produce a flame. After that, they went about gathering the driest kindling they could find, and soon had their main fire restarted. Soon we observed that the individual who had made that flame on the night of the storm was keeping the stone with him, apparently at the urging of the tribe's alpha leader. "This is an interesting development," the curator told us. "The leader is probably a little afraid of it, but they all recognize its usefulness and power. Delegating a power like this to another is an important step on the road toward making complex societies that can perform deep planning and execute non-trivial projects. And it's not usually directly related to the acquisition of fire. Most primitive human societies that we've studied had a broad division between what you might call alpha leadership and the vocation of consulting the gods," I said. "Could this person become their first witch doctor? Humans followed that path because, not being curated, your ancestors had no idea where such powers came from. Eventually, these creatures will know how they benefited from our intervention, but it's too early now. They don't have the faculties to properly assess their role in the universe yet." Back in Terlingua, 6 weeks after leaving, we caught Quentin up on our adventure. "Their role in the universe. What do you suppose the curators think those creatures' role in the universe is supposed to be?" It was a good question, and one we couldn't easily answer, except to observe that the way she had said it seemed clear that their role in the universe would never compare to that of the curators. And for all the benefit we were bringing to them, the curators' methods might just be designed, at least in part, to make sure it stayed that way. Back on Terra Nova, Zeke was putting the finishing touches on his new killing machine. He had given up on conventional human tech and fitted his flying sled with something that looked like a giant electric bazooka. "What the hell is that?" Emma asked as we sized it up. "Gravity plating railgun," Zeke said as he completed an adjustment. Sure enough, we realized the launch tube was made up of hundreds of circular plates of nanite gravity plating in a 4-meter-long stack. "Gave up on explosive propellants," Emma said brightly. "Not good enough," Zeke said. "These fuckers are tough. I've got first kill, but I'm still going to get first one shot on them. We can't blow 100 rounds of antique ammo on every one of 500,000 individual critters." "That thing must weigh a ton," I said. "Just about. Gotta love gravity plating, though. Doesn't matter how much something weighs if you can get it in the field, it just floats." "So what does this thing fire?" Zeke tossed her a metal bar. It was about 3 centimeters diameter, 1/2 meter long, and Emma seemed surprised at its heft as she caught it. "Tungsten," Zeke said, "and we'll recover and recycle them." "About 7 kilograms, right?" "Should be enough to punch through that tough skin." "What's your target velocity?" "About 2 kilometers per second. Should look satisfyingly like a normal gunshot to the spectators, and no recoil." "Just a second," Emma said. "How the hell do you get that kind of acceleration from gravity plating?" She didn't say it out loud, but that's on the order of what she could summon by directing the gravity of a black hole, and that's a little more intense than what holds us down to the floor. That you would have to ask the technical guys. I'm just aiming it at the monsters. At Zeke's direction, we found the weapons lab and found the railgun team. "Oh, it was quite an adventure," one of the engineers bragged. "I was on the team that was trying to reverse engineer this stuff before the curators paid us for the civilian fold inhibitor by giving us the technique. Nanite plating contains protective circuitry to keep it from being overloaded past about 2.5 Earth gravities. But we found that with the curator's description we could locate functional elements within the nanite lattice, and we could selectively disable the overload sensors by burning them out with an ultraviolet laser. Takes about half an hour to treat one of these plates." He handed us a single railgun plate, 1/2 centimeter thick and 30 centimeters in diameter with a 3-centimeter central borehole. This made it possible to push the plates to 100 gravities at least for a few milliseconds before they would start to melt. And by selectively leaving some of the overloads in place, we could refractively focus the beam, so the whole plate's effect is concentrated mostly along the central bore. That got us to 1,000 gravities. And stacking 500 plates to make a 4-meter-long cannon gives us a combined 500,000 gravities over the length of the bore. Takes about 5 milliseconds to get the projectile up to speed, and in classic fold fashion the bullet has a lot more energy than we put into the gravity pulses. Conservation of energy, take that. How does it compare to the Lati? Oh, the elephant gun manages about 800 meters per second for a 300-gram projectile. So MV² makes the railgun over 100 times more powerful. But it took 300 Lati rounds to take one of these things down, and it still lived for a few more hours after the attack. True, but this will hit it all at once and put all the energy in one chosen spot. If Zeke hits the heart or brain, it's lights out. The biologists were less impressed. "He'll probably get a one-shot kill with it," the research head said. "But not every time. You would pretty much need a direct hit on the heart or the brain for a quick kill, and everything is well protected. The big guys, both carnivores and herbivores, have thick skulls and their hearts are protected deep within the mass of their body. And their other vulnerable points are much smaller targets. Hitting one of them in one shot would be a trick shot of the first order." "Any luck on your end?" I asked. "Not much. The evolutionary arms race has reduced diversity so that there aren't a lot of macroscopic animal species, and the ones that have survived are pretty closely related. Pretty much all the macrofauna we've found are more closely related to each other than just the mammals of Earth are. If you get down to individuals weighing less than a kilogram, there are a few less related stragglers, but those would be likely to survive the Curators asteroid anyway. That's what our ancestors were in the Cretaceous. Wouldn't a natural pandemic be likely to wipe everything out?" "You'd think so, but we really haven't found many sick animals, and we think all of those have been old. It may be that these forms are the survivors of a wave of pandemics that left them all with similar immune complexes. There's nothing biochemically different about the big and small forms. Not that we've found at the scale of interest. Everything on land larger than a wolf or gazelle is pretty much the same class and forming only a handful of orders. If there were other megafauna classes, the beakosaurs and their relatives must have wiped them out long ago. We have yet to propose even a simulated disease organism that might affect the big guys that wouldn't affect the smaller ones even harder. And they have similar vulnerabilities to chemical toxins as well. One of the hunters suggested that they could go for poisoning with small pellets of something highly toxic like polonium-210, instead of going for outright kills. After a few thousand years, there'd be nothing left in the environment but harmless trace amounts of decay products. But the problem with that is that scavengers would ingest and spread the toxin. Any successful program is going to leave a lot of carrion lying around to be scavenged, and if we make a real dent in the large animals' population, we would expect at least a temporary surge in numbers of the smaller ones as a result. So you're telling us we offered to show off our celebrated killing skill on a world of unkillable super predators? Oh, it's not just the predators. Don't even get me started on the herbivores. They have effective defenses against the predators, and the kind of bad temper we might have if we were being hunted all day long by actual T-Rexes back home. And they form herds. The ironic thing is that this is exactly the reason the Curators want to throw an asteroid at the place. In a lot of ways, it's even further along a dead-end evolutionary pathway than Earth was 65 million years ago. Even if we wipe out all the biggest guys, considering who will be left, it's very likely they'll just re-evolve as surviving smaller species reoccupy the niches we open. So you think we're wasting our time? Not so far. The boys will have their fun. And it's kind of fun watching them bash their heads against this particular wall. And we're learning a lot. Politeness forbids us from doing this kind of survey on most of the worlds we visit. But as for fulfilling our stated mission, I think you're going to end up slinking back to the Curators and admitting that this time they had the right idea. Of course, we turned out to see Zeke go for what would be the first one-shot kill of the entire campaign. In keeping with his goal, he hadn't fitted his gravity railgun with a means to reload it. It had been fired a few times to sight it in, but it needed to be loaded from the rear. The bullet was held in place with light-duty clips until the gravity plating stack went to work. The new flying sled was longer and wider than the one that had flown the Lati, and like that one, Zeke flew it on his belly, lying alongside his gravity gun. "Doesn't the gravity pulse affect you at such close proximity?" Emma asked when she saw the arrangement. "A little, but the plating is focused to affect things beyond its bore as little as possible. I can feel a little jerk when it fires, but nothing dangerous." While we talked, Zeke loaded the gun, carefully pushing the bullet into place through the hole in the rear of the cannon. There was a faint click as the clips locked it in place. "So who cut all the gravity plating donuts?" "The scientists cut the first few prototypes, but when they told me what might be possible, I arranged to order them custom-grown. It was a lot of fun trying to explain to the alien procurement agent why we wanted 1,000 gravity plating circles this size with holes in the middle." "What did you tell them?" "Special form space hydroponic lab. Humans are always doing weird shit nobody else would think of, so nobody's the wiser." "Some of the Curators are going to have a cow when they learn about this," Emma said after we left. "They already have a whole dairy farm, don't they?" We took up position on the observation flyer and watched through our binoculars as Zeke closed in on his prey. He was intent on getting as close as possible for both maximum impact energy and best aim. He was going to try for a heart shot, and the animal's heart was deeply located behind 1/2 meter of other flesh, including a very thick and tough layer of skin and scales. Fortunately, the flyer was silent, and Zeke was sensibly approaching from the animal's blind spot in the rear this time. He took his time placing the laser sight dot where the anatomists had told him his chances would be best, and he fired. Zeke and his cannon then zoomed straight up, not waiting for the animal's reaction as it started to wheel around. The tungsten bullet had entered the animal's body exactly where Zeke intended, and a great jet of blood was now erupting from that wound. But the bullet hadn't exited, and it was unclear just how much damage it might have done. As Zeke hovered, the animal jumped, but Zeke had flown too high for it to reach, and in mid-leap it appeared to lurch. Instead of landing on its elegant spring-loaded hindquarters, it collapsed in a heap, with several loud snaps suggesting broken bones. It continued to thrash and scream for a few more minutes as blood jetted from the wound, and then both the blood jet and the screaming came to a sudden simultaneous end. Zeke waited a few more minutes and then posed while a drone took his picture in front of the animal's massive beak. Later there would be more barbecue, and someone would have to figure out how to retrieve the tungsten bullet. In one of the Nostromo's conference rooms, they had set up a leaderboard with a summary for each of the largest species. For the largest predator, Zeke now had both first one-shot kill. We saw that the remaining categories were bare hand, passive, and pack-in. We found Zeke and asked him what was up with those. "None of them likely to be claimed for these biggest guys," Zeke laughed. "Bare hand is just what it sounds like, no weapons. Passive means only weapons powered by human muscles, like knives, spears, bows, atlatls, and such. Pack-in means whatever technology you can carry without mechanical assistance for at least a kilometer to reach the kill site. Someone could maybe technically try for that one with the Lati, but only if you can figure out how not to get killed by a giant wounded murder-saurus before it realizes it's dead." "Any ideas on getting the bullet back?" I asked. "Wait until the scavengers do their thing and collect it from the bone pile." While we were celebrating, the silver-furred curator invited us to join her for possible placement of a tablet of writing, so we retired early and simply disappeared from Terra Nova to continue that branch of our studies. The silver-furred curator brought us to a world that strongly resembled Earth in its mix of megafauna, its widely separated continents, and its prominent ice caps. She was wearing an amplifier belt, and when we asked if that was necessary to introduce writing, she said no. There was another ongoing project for which she happened to need it. Our species of interest was confined to one subcontinental landmass by the oceans and climatic barriers. Their ancestors going back a few million years had been small pack carnivores like wolves, but they had adopted a bipedal gait and fingers as a changing climate altered their circumstances. The curators had encouraged them to become omnivorous, introducing genetic modifications to lengthen their digestive tract and giving them fire for cooking to make tough plant fibers more digestible. 1,000,000 years of hunting and gathering had drawn them toward a fairly common body profile, so that they could run, see at a distance, and pick and carry forage. They had spears and atlatls, but not the bow, and they did have flint knapping for making points, but they had not elevated it to the art humans once had before other technologies came along. More recently, the curators had introduced agriculture by teaching them to spread and cover seeds in places where they might want mature plants in the future. This had allowed them to reduce their range of nomadic migration, but they still lived in small mobile clans and did not have anything like formal trade. "How long have they known about seeds and planting?" I asked as we watched one of the tribes from afar. "About 2,500 years. It seems odd that they haven't progressed more. On Earth, cities quickly emerged after agriculture was developed." "Well, yes, as in most ways Earth is an outlier. This is a more normal pace of development, but one which we do think it's time to move along." She showed Emma the tablet of writing which one of us would leave with them once. As with the recipients of the Firestone, we had identified the best candidate to receive it. The tablet was in introduction mode, and displayed a single glyph which we recognized from the written form of Galactic Common. When Emma touched the tablet, it glowed and spoke the sound represented by the glyph. Emma spoke a few words of Common and they appeared on the tablet. "We're teaching them Common?" she asked skeptically. "No, just using the glyphs. No reason to reinvent the wheel. The tablet actually knows their language and will actively guide them once they reach a suitable level of development." "What will they write with?" "At first they can write on the tablet with a finger or stick. Eventually it will require them to use a coating like pigment or soot, and the tablet won't be permanently stained like the other surfaces they will be sure to try. As with the Firestone, the idea is to form habits which become useful tools to implement the behavior we want to encourage." "That's rather like the way we train animals," I said, and Emma looked at me sharply. But the curator was nonplussed. "That's appropriate because we are animals," she said. "That is not something we want to abandon. Even our curator implants are carefully engineered not to turn us into machines. But these methods are more manipulative than informative. We aren't really teaching them why writing is important and useful. We're conditioning them to do it without thinking. But that's the steadiest way of introducing a new skill. At this point in their development, it is more useful to introduce useful skills than a philosophical appreciation of why they need those skills. This species is in a much stronger position than the last one we met. It has a much larger population and they face fewer threats both individually and existentially. Each of our gifts is meant to strengthen them further without entirely replacing their original uniqueness with our own vision. Since we were observing these guys in the daytime, our camp was on the same side of the world but on the far side of a field of glaciers which they had not yet figured out how to cross. The curator diagrammed our decision-making process in glowing glyphs in the air between us. Tribe 18 has the best distribution of cultivated patches, she said, making them more likely to use writing for record-keeping and extending their agricultural skill. But Tribe 30 has the widest association with other tribes, making them more likely to use writing for trade and negotiation. I'm interested to hear your reasoning on which to favor. I take it part of the lesson will be basic math. Yes, they can already count to about 20, and part of the lesson will be to extend that. I'd go with the potential traders then, Emma said. Trade will put pressure on resource availability, kind of forcing them in that direction too. I agree. That's what drove it on Earth, I added. The curator made a gesture we recognized as her race's expression of a sigh. Of course, but that's exactly why we don't want to give them the tablet. We want them to absorb change at a manageable pace. By the time anyone realizes the farmers are doing something different, they will have mastered the art and given it a fixed place in their routine. Further uses will follow, but at a measured rate as new tribes are exposed to the art and pick it up with a focus on that purpose. Do you see? Yes, if that's the goal, then your decision makes sense and it is your project. You would of course take the risk of explosive growth because that is your only experience. These people are gradually being lifted from privation and the risk of predation and have never made war. Humans had to develop quickly because other humans were developing quickly too, and it became a race. But it was all among yourselves and unnecessary. The universe is not so hostile that we need to get up to speed to make war with it. But haven't a lot of races, including our own ancestors, been wiped out by their own stars, making their system uninhabitable? Wouldn't it make sense to resist such a conclusion? So human. As one of your poets once said, rage, rage against the dying of the light. But the light always dies. This is the natural progression of things. The background color of space is the blackness of nothing. The curators have gone to some considerable effort to not die all that soon, I said carefully. This is true, but as our friends the witnesses are fond of pointing out, even we aren't immortal. We just drag it out so that we can properly manage the task of curation. But long life also separates us from the dynamic reality of life in our garden. Once we are curators, we can never again simply live among our children without being constantly aware that we are different. We can never truly be friends with creatures that do not share our longevity. And if our longevity were universal, our garden would be ruined. All patterns of change would be frozen or disrupted. We watched for another week, and then I made the gift of the tablet to the tribe which had the most extensive cultivated plots. Although calling them cultivated was a bit generous. They had learned to scatter seeds and to make sure there was water and shade and sunlight for certain crops, but they did not treat the ground in any way or attempt to bury their seeds. They had not learned to plant and harvest tubers because they didn't realize the roots could be edible. The curator said this was a normal pace of development. As we prepared to break camp, she said, "There is something I need to tell you. I don't know who made the decision to give me this assignment, but I don't think it was a good idea." What? I know you've been told that the decision was made not to curate your species because we felt that your tendency to make war would limit both your population and your developmental potential. Most of the curators you have met were either neutral toward that decision or, as with our other human form colleague, actively disagreed with it. Which is fair. Even curators can have disagreements. I can see now that I was objectively wrong about the human race in several ways, although I don't necessarily think the situation is better than I originally imagined. What is not fair is this. You should know that I was one of the individuals who made that decision. 6 of us were entrusted with the fate of your species, and we voted 4-2 to leave you to your own devices. Thanks for telling us, Emma said. I suppose I can understand. I guess we're all glad that you were wrong. She made a staccato snort that we recognized as a laugh. Oh, I wasn't wrong, she said. I just wasn't right enough. If I could go back and advise myself based on what I now know, I'd lobby to have your ancestors genocidally exterminated. In your short time among us, you have ruined your planet. You have taken over other planets. You have shown others how to take over other planets. and you have introduced new modalities at a rate unseen since the time of the ancestors themselves. New fold drives, new fold technologies. You've gone to great effort to not just use those technologies yourselves, but also to spread them across the whole galaxy. New weapons. It wasn't enough that you made a radiation projector out of our communication technology. Now you've made a projectile cannon out of gravity plating. Is there anything your people won't turn into a weapon? Emma was giggling, which perplexed the curator. You find this funny? Oh, I suppose it isn't. I guess you're right about everything. But I was just thinking that back when we had countries and spies and soldiers and all that, which we don't anymore, of course, that yes, one of the skills that our Black Op guys were taught was how to kill with a pencil. So yes, I guess we are guilty of turning everything we touch into weapons. And she burst out laughing. The curator looked at me. And this is funny to you people. Our psychologists think that humor is sometimes an interrupted defense mechanism. It softens the blow of realizing the unpleasant truth of a situation. Well, in that case, there is something I do need to show you. Fold with me. She gave us coordinates, and in a spirit of conviviality, we let her guide us. We found ourselves in a human-made inflatable habitat module. What's this? This is where I sincerely apologize. I hated the lying, and I hated pretending that you are not the most dangerous vermin to infect our garden in all of living memory, which for us is a long, long time. And as dangerous as your species is, the even more crazy and dangerous thing which was done was giving you two our powers. Half the terrible things humans have done to our garden have been done by you two specifically. So if there was any other way to do this, just know I would have taken it. But there isn't. Not at this point. Goodbye, Jay and Emma of Earth. And she folded out. That was... Fold inhibitor, Emma said. I triggered some automated checks and realized she was right. We were stuck in the field of a fold inhibitor. But how? I think we would have sensed it if the field had been shuttered. She was wearing an amplifier belt. We didn't fold ourselves here. She folded us here. The amplifier must be able to punch through from outside the inhibition field. Our implants can only get 100 meters or so, and there's nothing around outside but vacuum. It began to dawn on us that the hab was completely empty. There was no equipment of any kind, no pressure suits, no communication gear, not even any atmospheric processing equipment. There was, however, a piece of paper on the floor, which was hand-printed in Galactic Common. I read it. I wanted to leave you with privacy to say your goodbyes, but I am not a cruel being by nature. Accordingly, the end will be merciful. Hopefully we can deal with the rest of your species in a less final fashion. That is rather ominous, Emma said. After a minute or so, there was a loud beep, and then a small explosion punched in the wall of the hab. It wasn't strong enough to harm us, but it had been placed at the base of a seam which ripped open, spilling the hab's atmosphere out into the night of some world-stabilizing moon. With our last breaths, Emma and I embraced, and because it was impossible to talk in the howling and thinning maelstrom, Emma spoke through her implant in my head. It has been an honor and a privilege to fly with you. A few moments later, we collapsed unconscious to the floor as the deflated roof of the hab floated down to cover us. To be continued.